Well, hey there, this is Adam. Welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Today, King of the Hill. If you remember, in 1972, Motor Trend had an article, I believe it was Motor Trend, that they compared the 1972 Cadillac Deville to the Lincoln Continental to the Imperial. So we're missing clearly a Cadillac Deville from 1972 to evaluate this test. But I will say this, I've owned actually a 1972 sedan Deville in my past, and I've obviously owned a 72 Continental and a 72 Imperial. And which one of these three did I sell? You can guess which ones I think are better than the other, at least. But thought this would be an interesting comparison. Super rare vehicles here. This 1972 Imperial is actually Sid Mead's very Imperial. That was his car. I bought it through a friend of a friend who introduced me to Sid. It's about one of 12,000 made. They made about 12,000 of these four-door hardtops. They made about 2,000 of the two-door coupes, which I'd love to have a coupe, but the sedan is just a beautifully proportioned vehicle, and it looks like the future. I mean, it looks like something a visual futurist would drive. I haven't seen many of these for sale, or hardly any at all, and I always wanted one, and being black with a gold interior really doesn't get much better than that. So I've had this car probably since about 2019. This vehicle, this 1972 Continental, I picked up about a year ago in New Jersey, and I picked it up for one simple reason. I always like these vehicles, but this car is devoid of a vinyl top. It has no body side molding, no accent stripe, and it just looks so beautiful and sinister all at the same time. You really can't get that combination. The Cadillac was a great looking car with that kind of torpedo shape on the side, very prominent front grille, but I'll get into why I think the Cadillac would rank third out of these three, and I'll tell you which one I think ranks number one as well. But this car, they made about 10,000 of these Lincoln Coupes in 1972, made about 40-ish thousand of the four doors. So the coupe is pretty rare, but this is one of 400 that are painted factory black. That includes cars with a vinyl roof, and I believe it's one of 131 that are black exterior with this black cloth interior. So super, super rare. Both of these cars have low miles. This car is about 13,500 miles. This car is 12,500 miles. So they're practically new. This one's powered by a 460 cubic inch V8 making 224 horsepower. This one's powered by Chrysler's Top Dog 440 that made 225 horsepower. And it's the last year for the 440 before in 1973 they started putting cast iron connecting rods and crank and thing. This still has forged items in the internals. So let's take the camera off and walk around the vehicles and talk a little bit more about them. So let's start out with the 72 Continental here, and you might get a chuckle out of my Hawaii license plate. I put that on there because this was the goon car on Hawaii 5.0. It was a four-door, but still looks the same. It was always this black Continental. And it's just an absolutely stunning vehicle in person. You can see it has a number of those Lincoln Key design elements that were introduced in part on the Mark III and then carried on over time. But these beautiful kind of pontoon fenders with really no lead-in. It's kind of a straight line, very designed by a T-square-ish, if you will. And this beautiful beveled surface that runs the length of the car, coupled with Lincoln's little concave trough here that you don't see on the Imperial with its fuselage body styling, and you didn't see on the Fords either. Mercury had that trait because it was the Lincoln Mercury division. 1972 was also the first year for this grille that spilled over into the headlights. Kind of different texture, the shape within a shape, the rectangle or the squares within a rectangle. Gives it some nice visual interest, and obviously this was the year of the hidden headlights. The Cadillac had exposed lamps, and this has exposed parking lights. Of course, they both have exposed parking lights. But both of these cars have hidden headlamps, and I think that helps make them look even more sinister. And here you can see, I think this is a beautiful area of the car here, where without the vinyl roof, it just shows off so well. And look at how long this car is. The Imperial is actually slightly longer. The Lincoln's about 2 inches shy, I think, of the Imperial, or maybe 1 inch shy. The 73 Imperial would be the longest production car ever made, And it's basically the same as the 72, except it has bigger bumper guards in the rear than this one does. But Lincoln had this triple light theme on a number of vehicles, and then Mercury copied it, and particularly the 1973 Marquis in the back had that triple light theme. And just some beautiful surfacing on this car, despite the fact that it's very angular. Love how this crease kind of fades in and fades out on the trunk. And those 3 taillights on either side just make this car look absolutely massive. I'm not sure why, but they have this different logo, the Lincoln logo, over the trunk lock cover than what was used on the rest of the car, including on the sail panel there. This car does have a little bit of a Coke bottle shape, actually. It does bulge out here in plan view, and you can see that it does, the belt line rises, and this lower crease really stays flat. This drag section down here is pretty static throughout the car, but it does slightly bulge out here at the wheels, and then it does kind of come inward. It's a little hard to see. It's very, very slight, but I think just beautifully done. This car is a standard wheel disc. I would love to find a set of the optional turbine vane Lincoln wheel covers. I have sets for Mercury's, but I haven't found the Lincoln centers. So if anybody's got a set, let me know. These are the standard wheel covers, and they look okay, but they're not my favorite. You can tell this car does have cornering lights. And just a study in contrast and design versus the fuselage era styling. Here you've got very angular styling, and you have this beautiful beveled surface that runs the length of the car, and that little trough on the door. And here on the fuselage era Chrysler, you have none of that. You have super clean body sections, just beautiful surfacing, because you have this convex surface that flips concave and then tucks under. You get these beautiful reflections on this car. This car does not have many concave surfaces on it anywhere aside from that little trough in the door. It does have some really nice filleting here that kind of sweeps up, almost like somebody was pushing this surface so that it buckled in the middle. I think just a wonderful detail. The Imperial has something similar, but has this really futuristic front end. You can see the Imperial logo there. And the hidden headlights. Again, the shape within a shape theme, similar to the Continental. Here you've got rectangles within rectangles. This car does have vent glass panes. I believe Chrysler used General Motors vent window motors. They didn't make their own. They often use Saginaw steering columns as well. Both of these cars are pretty tall, but the fuselage era Imperial, you can see, is visually taller than the Lincoln, and it's also taller than the Cadillac. This car, if you just were walking up to it in a parking lot, kind of glowering at you, you'd almost be afraid to take the keys, because it's just physically imposing. It's not only long, but it's tall. It kind of hits you at belly button level, even for someone like me who's 6 feet tall. At least the beltline does. And the beltline has this beautiful gentle rise to it all throughout the length of the vehicle, whereas the Lincoln is just pretty straight and then kicks up at the sail panel. Now here's where it starts to get fun, is the interior of these. This one, as I said, is gold. This is the factory gold color with the leather seating areas that mimic the Barcelona chair. And you have these beautiful casket handle door pulls that swing out like this, allow you to close the door, and you can see a little pocket there if you want to store things. This dash was pretty similar to what was used on the lower level Chryslers. This instrument panel crash pad padding, though, is much thicker. The gauges are about the same, although you do get full gauges on here, including temperature, oil pressure and amperage gauge. On the New Yorkers, you did not get the temperature of the oil pressure gauge, and you get these little sentry signals that say fasten belts and lock doors, and if you have low fuel or some issue, this one illuminates. It says check gauges. So with the 440, it's often illuminated because I need gas. Here's the driver's control panel. You can see the pocket, as I mentioned here, with the little snap. And all of these controls, it's power vent windows. And then of course you have the door lock and a window lock as well. This is the mirror control. This car does have power seat, and it has Chrysler's Auto Temp 2 system, which Chrysler sold to Mercedes actually. And that's how I got a rebuilt Auto Temp unit, as I bought it from a Mercedes rebuilder. And this car, the fan didn't kick on when I first got it. The heat didn't work, and you just had to replace the Auto Temp box. I also love the lavalier strap back here and the head pillow, and you can see the reading light. That head pillow was something that Chrysler, I thought, was a really nice touch. And Chrysler was always good about packaging. This seat is all the way back. You have a ton of room in here, and these doors swing open super wide. There is no issue getting in this vehicle at all. Again, something Chrysler did very, very well, I think, in this era. One thing they did not do well is think about the placement of the seatbelt buckles, and when it's loose, you don't have a buckle that bangs against the trim, which, of course, if you don't have a passenger, you're not going to have anybody buckling the seatbelt. This does have the tilt telescoping wheel. You move this little lever down here, and then this moves in and out, you can see. Only 4 air outlets on this car. 2 here, 2 there. There are little ones underneath that you can open for a little extra ventilation. And it does have the vent pulls to allow you to use the vent on either side as well. And another nice feature, that lock cylinder for the key is illuminated until these red lights go out here. It's got an illuminated entry system that is helpful at night. See, now that light would go out. Another interesting feature is, I think in 1971 there used to be or 1970 there was a light here that cast a light on this control panel. Chrysler took it out as a cost-cutting move, but they put a little mirror up here so that the floodlighting on the instrument panel deflects down there and illuminates it. It's genius, it works, and it was cheap. So perfect for a finance guy. If we look at the Lincoln, you have a totally different theme here. This is a unique dash that was only used on Lincoln, this racetrack panel that later in the late 1970s they would get rid of and just use the common Ford Mercury dash. But in 1972 they still used it with this rotating drum speedometer. I think it's very handsome. The materials, you know, compared to the Mark III though, aren't as nice on this car. You can see this is hard plastic, this area on the armrest. I do love the brocade cloth, and you can see this door panel here. It's a heavy door. This car doesn't have power locks. It does have power seat, but pretty low option vehicle. No cruise control, has the rim blow wheel. Both of these have the rim blow wheel where you squeeze and you pinch the rim to honk the horn. Also has a full complement of gauges that Chrysler used to poke fun at Lincoln for putting there, because if you had bifocals you couldn't read them very well because they were at the bottom of your line of sight. Another nice little Easter egg touch, these lights in the sail panel were common on many Fords, but on this Lincoln they actually have a little Lincoln logo in the middle of them. Let's pop the hoods and take a look here. So here is the 460. As I mentioned, 224 horsepower in the Continental. I believe it was 212 horsepower in the Marks. And by this point, this was a low compression 460. 1972, these heads on this are kind of the worst heads of all of the 460 regular fuel heads. They have a tendency to spark knock, so I just use premium gas in them. All the 72s are like that. You notice there's a GM Saginaw steering pump and a GM A6 air conditioning compressor, and if you open up that evaporator core, it'll say Harrison, which was GM's air conditioning division. Ford couldn't get the York 2 piston to cool all that well, so they ended up using a GM system in here. Sometimes they even use a Saginaw steering gear. I don't know if this one has it or not. I don't think so. No, it says F on the top of the steering gear, but some Fords actually had a Saginaw steering gear too. Amazingly roomy under here, and you got the canisters for the hidden headlights and the climate control. And where you could steal the Lincoln pretty easily because it doesn't have a interior hood release, that was not true on the Chrysler. The Cadillac also had an interior hood release. Ford was a year behind on that from everybody else. I guess they thought it just wasn't important. All right, see if I can get this open. There we go. Here you have Chrysler's the AirTemp V2 air conditioning compressor. It works great. Super, super cold AC. This one's still operating on R12. There's the Chrysler AirTemp 2 control box where you get 4 heater hoses that come in or out. That controls the heater flow through the heater core. You can see all these vacuum connections back here. That operates everything. The mode doors, the fan speed, absolutely everything. And the original ones had a plastic housing. These rebuilt ones have a metal housing. You can imagine plastic doesn't mesh well with antifreeze that's flowing through it. Strangely, this hood doesn't open very wide on these Imperials, and they do have a different front suspension setup that's a nightmare to align. So be sure to be nice to your mechanic. These are also not fun to change the spark plugs on. You can see the spark plugs are under the exhaust manifold, and the power steering gear is there. It's just a bear to do compared to any other vehicle. It's doable, but it's not a fun job. It's a knuckle skinner on this car. I get most of them from the bottom, or in some cases you pull out the wheel, this mud flap here, and take the wheel off. The Lincoln is much, much easier in that regard. Here you can see the headlight motor. This is an electric motor for the headlights that activates both sides. And this also shows you why these cars were so hated in demolition derbies unless you were driving them. Look at the distance from the grille to the radiator. Oftentimes they would ban these from demolition derbies. You can see this is not really a frame, this car is unibody, but the cross bracing here is immense. I mean, this is not this car is going to take a pretty good hit. The Imperials that were full frame up to 1966, I believe, was the last year. The bracing underneath is even more sturdy than this. Now, for all of you aficionados, I'm sure you want to hear the Chrysler starter engage. And as soon as I find my keys for this car, which you put in upside down if you're a GM aficionado, Chryslers, you put the key with the cut side in like that. Here we go. The Highland Park Hummingbird, as some call it, the Chrysler starter. And I love out back these kind of gothic tail lights that, unlike Cadillacs that were perfectly vertical, these are tilted a little bit inward, and beautiful integration of the reverse light down there. Just a silent engine. Single exhaust on both of these cars. It would benefit from duals, but I'm not hot rodding the car, and this car's got a relatively new exhaust system, so I'll just leave it alone. And we'll fire up the Ford. This car needs a new muffler, so don't hold it against it. But it sounds authoritative. Well, and there you have it. The 72 Lincoln versus the 72 Imperial. So which of these beasts would I choose if I were driving daily? That one. Super, super smooth ride, super quiet. Love the looks. But that said, I also love the Imperial too. I think it's just an awesome looking car. It's a little bit noisier on the inside, although it's much more quiet than the typical Chryslers of the era that had unibody. But I think the fit and finish of the Lincoln, I mean, every cut line on this car lines up just perfectly. The doors close like a bank vault. The ride is amazing. I'd pick this car. This would be a close second though. And the Cadillac would be, frankly, a distant third. The quality on the Cadillac in 1972 was just abysmal. Horrible interior materials, horrible fits and finishes. Yes, I am a GM guy, but the Cadillacs in that era I just find absolutely deplorable. They're even so bad that the door pulls used to pull out because the doors would sag, and the factory fix was to drill a screw through the escutcheon plate through the door panel. So sometimes you'll see the door panels with exposed screws on the 71 and 72 Cadillacs. That's the kind of quality they used to have. In any case, hope you enjoyed this King of the Hill comparison. Thanks again for watching. All right, so brief little ride here. You'll see the check gauges light coming on because I need gas. And though Chrysler's 440, this Imperial is actually the slowest of the Cadillac, Lincoln, Imperial trio. I think it took about 11 seconds here to 60. You don't notice it at all. Actually, the car feels peppier, I would say, than the Lincoln 460. Until you floor it, and it doesn't have the same speed, but the torque is awesome. Nothing to complain about in this Imperial. It does have a little bit more impact harshness than the Lincoln. Wonderfully smooth 727 Chrysler Torque Flight transmission. And you sit high in this car. It's almost like you're driving an SUV because it's so tall. Look at the view out that hood though. There are no turn signals in the dash on the Imperial because you have the fender indicators. So there's nothing that blinks on the dash. I thought that was thought I had some burned out bulbs, but in fact they don't have them on the Imperial. Effortless power from the 440, so smooth. And just wonderfully comfortable seats. The ride in here is definitely stiffer than the Lincoln too. This is not a plush ride. It's pretty stiff. In any case, hope you enjoyed this brief drive in the 72 Imperial. All right, so here we are in the Lincoln. First thing you notice is it's so much smoother than the Imperial in terms of the impact harshness. I love the rolling drum speedometer there. And you also notice that it has the smallest inside rear view mirror of any luxury car, and that these mirrors make a decent amount of wind noise on their own. interesting. I guess they didn't think that drivers of this car would have the windows down, but it's a beautiful night. And I have gas in this one. I love the turn signal on these too. Super cool looking. The other thing you notice in these is that the headroom in this Lincoln is pretty good. There's a lot of height inside, which is not true of the LTD and the Marquis of the year, which have this pretty low roof line. I'm guessing the Lincoln owners wanted room for a hat. The third thing you notice is that this seat is just super, super cushy. And the Imperial's is somewhat cushy, but this one you just kind of sink into and it's wonderful. There is no lateral support, no lumbar support, and I don't care. And this car actually corners halfway decently. I have a Mark IV, a 72 Mark IV, and this Continental handles much better than the Mark IV. The Mark IV is an even softer setup than this. This is a nice balance between ride and handling, and yes, you can laugh at me for saying handling, but it's actually relatively stiff. I will say the Cadillac was an even better handler than the Lincoln. The Imperial, though, was a really good handler with the torsion bar setup. In any case, hope you enjoyed this little brief drive of this Continental. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, take care.